Hello and welcome to your Van Gogh Sphere Part 1. So I took my palette out of my bag. I'm going to slip my Ziploc bag off to the side. And then this paper, I'm just going to leave out. I got some paint on it, but that protected the bag. This will dry, so I'm going to leave it out like that, and then I'll use it at the very end. I also always keep at least one paper towel next to me at all times, just in case. I have 2 sheets of newspaper on my surface. I did get a water cup, so I'd say any old cup in your house is just fine. I wouldn't, well, if you use plastic, sometimes the paint sticks to plastic, but glass you can always like scrape out. So at home I use a glass cup because I don't have like a lot of just like, or any container is totally fine. All right. So I am right-handed, so therefore I'm going to put my palette on my right-hand side, but I want it to be kind of close to the water. And then I also took a piece of newspaper out of one of the sets, just a single sheet, and I folded it. So this is what I'm actually going to mix my analogous colors on. So I'm going to set that off to the side. Oh, let me scoot some stuff. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Oh, this I made for you guys. This is more for your, I'm going to take you through the steps on your practice, but this is more to look at for your final draft. But it takes you step by step on how to kind of cheat a little bit and ways to get like a good result with that style. So it says step 1, and this is in your Google Classroom. Select a color scheme, then layer the background with a similar valued color that goes with your image. So I have my image. So I'm looking at how I'm going to use like a tone for this, maybe like a tint for this, and then a shade for that, and a shade for the cast shadow. And it says make sure the paint is solid and has clean edges. So pretty much we're just trying to cover the canvas and start out with good craftsmanship. I would use like the medium or the large brushes. So not the huge one, but one of those. Yeah, okay. Or this one would work. I'll use both of those. All right. So you do not need water on your brush. It actually works better if you don't have water on your brush. And I'm going to start out with my tone for the sphere. So this is the one that I added a little bit of the complementary color to. You just want it to be like a light or medium value. So the key is, just like in Art 1-2, is to get a clean edge. So you want to like drag your brush along the edge, like glide it along. And you do want to flatten the paint. And I have that little ridge there. That will flatten when it dries. And honestly, that's a pretty clean edge, so I'm just going to leave it alone. I could try to pull it in a little if you feel comfortable. But if you think it's going to mess up the edge, it's better to just leave it. All right. So then I would turn it so your arm is comfortable. So I'm going to glide along the edge. Flattening out my paint. Flatten that part. I'm also trying to cover my pencil. So just like in Art 1-2. Turning it so my arm is comfortable. A little bit more on my brush. Pull that part in. Okay. Then if I need to rinse out my brush, because now I'm going to do my darker background, I'm going to rinse out my brush with water. And I'm kind of like pushing the brush at the bottom to get rid of it, wiping it off on the water cup, and then on newspaper, you're going to dry your brush. So it doesn't have to be perfectly dry, but you want to get a lot of the water off. And then usually I'll reform it to keep the brushes nice. So the background is going to be my shade. Let me make a little bit more of this. And it's dark blue. So I'm looking at how in general in the image my background is darker. So it's not going to end up being this dark. And if you struggle with clean edges, like I'm going wet next to each other, you can always blow dry it to like speed up this process. But if you feel confident, then or comfortable, just go for it. Because I flipped over my brush, because I had more paint on the other side. I'll flip it back over. This is like super dark greenish blue. That looks not like that in the camera. So this is how you're going to start all of your practices. By laying in a background color. This is how you're going to start your final painting as well. That way we're covering the canvas. Okay, so I'm going to flatten. Got some ridges over here. Okay, so I do want to get all the way to the edge, so I'm just going to do it on the side of my newspaper. I wonder if you guys can see that. Hold on. Just got some stuff. So I'm trying to put it on the edge of the newspaper so that I'm not getting paint everywhere. But I'm going to go all the way to the edge. I'm just making sure the canvas is covered. I don't see any white specks of canvas sticking through. Also where the two meet, I'm trying to get rid of that. I'm going to use that same color for the cast shadow. So again, if you feel like you want to blow dry when you're trying to touch two wet edges next to each other for craftsmanship, then you might need to do that. Okay, here's probably where I'm going to switch brushes. I'm done with this big one because it's not getting the edges that I need. Oh, maybe. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to my medium or small brush, and I'm just going to use light blue that's already here, and then I have a tint for when I actually start. So I'm going to clean out my brush, because now I'm switching brushes, wiping off the water, drying off the water, reforming, and I'm going to set this one aside. So under no circumstances should you be putting a brush full of paint just sitting there. Because what happens is the acrylic dries in the bristles and then it doesn't come off and you've ruined that brush and you will pay for it. Because we had to buy brand new brushes for everyone to have their own sets. So it's very expensive for us to even like do a painting. Okay, so I'm going to overlap that horizon line just a little bit to get like a clean edge where there's no white showing through. So again, turn your canvas paper so that your arm is comfortable for clean edges. I have a lot of paint over here. I'm going to move some of that. So craftsmanship counts even though it's a practice, because this is you learning to paint a little bit better, and we're reviewing what you once knew and once did in the classroom. Or you want to drag your brush along the side to get a clean edge. I wouldn't just try to paint with the tip of the brush. So I kind of put a blob on there and then just move it around. And I like to usually go along the edge when it's medium full of paint. And we'll clean up that when we do our techniques. Okay. So there we go. We have our base layer. Next on the note sheet it says, with a light valued color that goes with your color scheme, add dash lines to draw out the movement lines that you will follow to apply the dash marks of paint. So I'm cleaning out my brush because now I'm going to switch brushes. Cleaned it out, wipe it off. And then at the end of this, I would actually use soap and clean them all out. But while I'm switching between brushes, I'm going to just clean them out with the water. I'm going to use my tiny brush, and I mixed my tint, which was mostly white with a tiny bit of color. And I'm going to use it all over the place. So I'm actually going to get a blob, and I'm going to put it on this little piece of newspaper. So I'm going to get a blob of the tint. And so similar, I'll kind of swirl that around a little. And then what I usually do is like twist the brush to get some of the paint off to make the bristles pointy. Okay, so I'm looking at like where the highlight is. And so I definitely want this to be rounded. I want my curved kind of little dash lines to be rounded. But I also want it to have a swirl in the center. So I'm gonna kind of like use little dash lines to just sketch out really lightly the movement or direction. It's not paint on my finger. And I'm gonna have it kind of change a little direction where the core shadow is. So same thing in this part. And I didn't even wipe off my brush. I'm just going to go for it. So I'll go that direction. The surface, I want it to be somewhat horizontal, so I want it to visually separate. All right, so this brush, the paint dries super fast on it, so I'm gonna actually dunk it in the water, and then I'm going to swirl. So I dunked it in the water, I didn't wipe it off. I'm just gonna swirl some water into this paint, and then I can twist it off so that you have thinner paint, and it works on the brush a little bit better. And a little bit of water on the brush. Okay, so I'm gonna go, and you can do whatever movement you want. And this can be wet or dry when you do this. You just want like a slight, I'm gonna do like a bit of a swirl over here, I think. Okay, then I'm going to do that in the background. So swirl a little bit of paint on there. I'm going to twist my brush to get some of it off. Okay, background. We don't have a whole lot of room for movement lines, but I think I'll do a little bit of a swirl on that side. Okay, so you're going to map out your directional lines. Okay. Then, cleaning off my brush. And then this is where I would use the paper towel. And I would actually like clean off the brush so that you're getting the paint off of the ferrule, the metal part, so that you've taken off all the paint. Put my paper towel off to the side. And I'm going to use this same puddle and I'm going to start adding in a layer. So you need about 10 layers of analogous colors in every single part. So 10 layers on the sphere, 10 layers on the cast shadow, 10 layers on the surface, 10 layers in the background. But you're going to use a lot of the same colors, so you won't have to be mixing that many. So I'm going to start out with this tint that I have, that I planned out my movement lines with. And I'm going to start with that. And so I'm looking at the directional lines that I have. So I'm kind of staying on some of those lines. So this counts as 2 layers. So I have my background layer and then I have this layer. So right here it looks kind of blobby. I want to make sure I get like a definite dash mark there. And as it fades out, so I'm looking at the edge of this image, how it's lighter along the edge. So that means I'm going to put little dash marks along the edge. And then I'm slowly kind of fading out a little bit. Noticing there's some light value down there. And I'm kind of staying away from this part because that's a much darker part. I'm going to stay away from the cast shadow as well, but on the surface it's definitely lighter. So I'm going to start there. Okay, so I'm swirling my paint in that same puddle, but now I'm going to get a little bit of water on my brush and swirl it in there because this will start drying on the newspaper fairly quickly. 1, the newspaper will absorb some of the water, and 2, it's such a thin little puddle that the water is evaporating out of it. I'm looking, okay, this bottom layer is fairly light, so I'm going to go some right along the edge of the cast shadow, and maybe just a couple over here. And it is lighter on this side, so I'll go right up to the edge and pull away. Okay, so then looking in the background, where is it lighter? I mean, it's not necessarily light, so I'm not going to add a whole lot, but I'll add a couple for variety. Okay, so I'm pretty much done with that color for now. So instead of like making a whole nother puddle, I'm going to use this one and I'm going to add a little bit of another color. So I'm going to add, I'm just going to go a little bit with the dark blue. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. So I'm going to use this puddle for another analogous color. And maybe I'm going to add a tiny touch of the red-orange for a tone to make it even darker. Ooh, that looks purple. Okay, let me add a little bit of blue to that. Then I'm going to dunk my brush in the water and swirl some water into it. So I use that same puddle, and I did not really rinse out my brush. So I'm going to get my brush in there, twist it off, and I'm going to do a whole nother layer. So this is like a mid-tone. So I'm definitely going to add Oh, that looks gray on here. That's okay. I'm gonna go between some of the layers that I have, fading up into the highlight. Or if it looks blobby, then you can add another layer. And I'm gonna just do a couple towards the center, because really this is more of like a mid-tone. I'm gonna go right up to the edge. And I'm gonna add some in the reflected light area. I apologize, this is hard for you guys to see. I can see it. Just mix up another color. And then decide, is it medium? Is it light? Where should it go? So I'm gonna do a couple in the core shadow part, just to start building up that area. Okay, on the surface. So I'm trying to get some that like touch the edge every time to create like a clean edge with the layering, so you don't have like a halo effect around where it's just the background color showing, because we cheated a little bit. Van Gogh definitely did not just straight up paint like a background color. Okay, I'm definitely gonna put some along the edge of the cast shadow, because that shadow kind of fades out a little. Which I'll work on. And I'm pretty much using up the rest of this puddle. So I want to make sure that I add some in the background too, so that I have visual balance with the colors that I've added. So I don't have just one color in one area. Okay. Now I'm going to mix up a dark value, but not as dark as the background and the cast shadow. So I'm going to take that, I just use the same puddle all the time. I'm going to start out with my dark blue. And I'm going to add some of the tone and a tiny bit of red and a tiny bit of yellow. Let's see what I get. Okay. And then I'm going to add a tiny bit of white so that you can see the color better. It's like a dark blue violet, which goes along with my color scheme. I'm going to dunk my brush in water and then swirl it into the puddle. Then twist my brush. So after this layer, I'd probably like take this to the sink and clean off my brush. All right. Now I'm going to put in where the where the core shadow is on the sphere. So I'm going to kind of do a little bit more in the shape that it is in. And then that fades up. I'm trying to use, I'm kind of twisting my brush. So I'm like using one side of the brush for some lines, the other side of the brush. Okay, dunking it in my puddle again. So this counts as another color. So far I have, on the sphere, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I need at least 6 more. Now, of course, a true painter would not count, but the more you add, the better it looks. Okay, so I have that core shadow kind of building. And I'm definitely going to add just more dark value, more layers of different ranges of dark value. Probably add some dark green in there. Okay, I'm going to fade over a little bit more. So I'm using less pressure because I'm going to want some thinner line. And as I build up my layers, I usually do a little bit less pressure. Okay, so I can use this color definitely in the background. I wonder, will that show? Nope, barely shows. Okay, well, I'll use it in the foreground or the surface for sure, especially kind of fading out that cast shadow. And I'm going to use this color to kind of perfect. Add a couple layers. And if you mess up, the great thing about paint is if you mess up, you can fix it. Like this little one looks like a blob, so I'm just going to go along the edge, make it look more like a dashed line. Okay, so over here in general, it is darker. So I'm going to add just like a couple little marks to start building up that all the way to the edge. It's slightly darker over here, so I'm going to kind of fade those out, those areas out a little. And then I'm going to add just like a couple like almost cleaning off your brush in a way, like a couple just for variety. So I usually try to use up my puddle, or if you know you're going to mix another color into it, you can leave it. All right, I'm going to add some in the background. You guys can't see it, but I definitely can. I wonder if you can see that. Nope, you really can't see that. These colors are too similar, but it counts as a layer. So Van Gogh painted with like really thick paint. He literally would like squeeze the tube of paint on his canvas. So that's how he was able to get that really thick effect, which you guys always want. But the layering will help make it look thick eventually. Okay, so that puddle's pretty much used up. Now I'm going to mix another color into this one that I already have. And actually, I'm going to use my medium brush for this. And then I'm going to add a tiny bit of blue, or sorry, tiny bit of yellow for like a greenish-y tone. And then a little tiny bit of white. Okay, turquoisey. I'm going to swirl that brush to get some of the paint off of it, dunk it in the water, swirl water into it, and then I kind of like, now my petal's getting big, so I'm going to scoop it into the center. Not very. Okay, so I have that petal. Okay, I'm going to clean out that brush. Set it off to the side. Cleaned off, so I did dunk my, I finally dunked my little tiny brush in the water to clean it off. And I'm going to do one more layer for you guys, and then I'm going to paint more, and then I'll come back and show you in part 2 how to refine. Like what you would need to do in your last couple layers. So let's see. All right, that's like a medium similar. So I want to try to like go in between. That's a nice color. I like that color. So I'm kind of fading up. I'm trying to avoid the highlight a little bit because I definitely am going to want to add some lighter valued colors in there. But I'm going to do a couple just to kind of fade up. And even in my core shadow part, I'm going to add a couple of this color, even though it's a mid-tone. again, like move your canvas paper so your arm is comfortable. But we can get like nice lines. Because they do need to be little dash lines, not just blobs of paint. Okay, so I feel like this color is medium enough that I can add it in the cast shadow. And I'm going to add it in the background and in the surface. And I'm trying to go like in between, but it's greenish-y, so I'm going to kind of use it sparingly on the surface. And so now I'm starting to notice, like anywhere where it looks bad, like here, you don't really see the little dash lines that looks bad, so I'm going to go on top of a couple of them with definite dash lines to fix that and clean it up. So by about like halfway through, by about like your 5th layer, I start like being a little more precise where I'm putting the little dash lines. And I'm trying to like go up to the edge, so I have less refining to do at the end. Or fixing stuff, like doing a dash line on the edge of another one to like fix it, like here, that looks bad. Okay, so back here it is lighter. I'm gonna do more in this area. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to paint for a little bit without the camera being on. I'm going to add probably about 3 to 4 more layers, and then I'll come back and do the last 2 with you guys. All right, so I'll see you in part 2 of the Van Gogh sphere.